I'm Mike.
I'm Sam. Let's get into it.
Better than going to, because I seen both experiences with my brother, but definitely just being home with family, it could just be chilling on the couch was definitely a vibe.
Welcome to episode 51 of the Mike and Sam Sports Show. Some massive NBA news. Obviously, the offseason just happened. The NBA draft happened, so we're going to have a big full NBA episode. So we're going to get into some winners and losers of the free agency, the offseason. So we'll do a little bing, bang, boom. We'll do one winner, one loser, and then we'll go through that. So I'll let you go first for your first winner of the offseason.
I think the first winner of the entire offseason just has to be the LA Lakers. If I told you before the offseason that they're able to greatly improve this already great championship roster without losing Kyle Kuzma, who obviously has been up and down, not the best player on the court, but still I think has some trade value in this league. So they ended up getting Montrezl Harrell, which I know he didn't perform in the playoffs too well. I know their on-off numbers in the fourth quarter with and without him were just night and day in terms of he was very bad on the court for the Clippers in the fourth quarter, but I think he was utilized very incorrectly down in LA with the Clippers, and I think he's going to be used more correctly. I don't think he's going to be in those crunch time lineups. We saw Anthony Davis play the 5 in those crunch time lineups in the playoffs. They're going to continue to do that. Montrezl Harrell is going to contribute a solid amount of minutes, 25, 26 minutes a game. He was arguably the best six-man in the entire league last year, winning six-man of the year. And whenever you get a player off of a rival's team, that in and of itself is great. So that's what they did. He doesn't even have to move. He can just basically go to practice, but at different scheduled times instead of having to even move. So that's huge for Montrezl Harrell, and that's huge for the Lakers. I mean, they also got Wesley Matthews, who's a pretty good 3-and-D shooter, who's going to replace what Danny Green gave them, which, as we know very famously, was not much shot creation in the playoffs. Still played great defense, but you're able to, segueing into that deal, you're able to ship away Danny Green, which if they shipped him away for a bunch of pennies, I wouldn't even care. But they shipped him away for Dennis Schroeder, who, again, arguably is the best six-man in the league, along with Montrezl Harrell. Great point guard, is really going to help LeBron transition to later stages of his career, taking more of that ball handling duty away from LeBron to Dennis Schroeder, better than Rondo, the best point guard LeBron has played with since Kyrie Irving. I mean, that's just very exciting for LeBron James and this Lakers team. They're able to sign Markieff Morris, who we thought would have a pretty good market, to a minimum deal. And then you get Marcus Gasol as well, who's going to really contribute to that rotation. I think just all around this Lakers offseason is a slam dunk. And for the worst thing to happen is that they still have to pay Luol Deng, I believe, $5 million off the salary cap. I think that's a fantastic offseason.
No, yeah, I completely agree. My number one was the Los Angeles Lakers. I think the biggest hit for them was losing Rajon Rondo because he is so great in the playoffs. But you lost him. It hurts, but you got Schroeder, you got Harold, you got Marcus Gasol, and you got Wesley Matthews. I think a lot of people will take that over losing Rondo. They did lose Dwight, who did play great in the playoffs all season, but I think Marcus Gasol is a lot better. It's an upgrade there, and obviously Wesley Matthews is a lot better of a shooter as of recently than Danny Green. I know Danny Green kind of made his career about shooting threes, but obviously a lot of those big playoff moments he kind of crumbled under it. So I think the Lakers are kind of the team to beat now. Obviously, there's like that kind of those top four in the Western Conference and Eastern Conference of the top teams, and I think the Lakers kind of solidify themselves as that top team. I know you said like they kept Kuzma, and I think that's a great kind of ace in the hole. If they keep Kuzma and then they really like are hurting at the trade deadline, they can ship him off at the trade deadline and get kind of more talent, which is I think would be really useful when they're trying to make a deep playoff run.
Yes, team just has a great starting five. They have a great bench. Again, adding KCP I think was absolutely huge because to lose Danny Green, that's fine. If they lost Danny Green and KCP, I do think that would hurt, but getting back KCP, who is a great shot maker, he's going to play really good defense, and he even flashed some playmaking ability in that playoff run. I think he was the most important role player, honestly, other than Anthony Davis and LeBron James alongside him. I thought KCP played pretty phenomenal in the finals. I know he had that pretty big, 16-point game, so that was pretty huge. But just for the Lakers, being able to run it back with relatively the same squad, but just even get better, again, I think that's huge. Losing JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, your two centers in that center rotation, I think in the regular season that might hurt a little bit. But again, they did add Marc Gasol. And come playoff time, I mean, JaVale McGee didn't even play in the playoffs. And then Dwight Howard, there was a couple series. I know the Rockets series. I know even the Trailblazers series where he got DNPs most of the games. In the Miami Heat series, we thought we'd see him, and he only played, 1 or 2 minutes in the finals. And I know he hit that like half court shot. And then he did have a big effect in that Nuggets series. But besides that, they really did not play that center position in the playoffs anyways. So to be able to add guard depth and wing depth and kind of take a little bit of a hit at the center position, I think that's perfect for them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I want to know. I'm curious to see what the money line is or the betting odds for them to win a championship. But I think they're favorites. I think they really did not lose that much. I think Rondo is the big key factor that they lost, but I just think what they gained was far greater than what they lost. So I'm gonna go into my first loser of the offseason. I know it's a bit of a surprising one. I don't think a lot of people would think about this being a loser, but I'm gonna go with the Boston Celtics.
Mm.
They did lose Gordon Hayward, which they did were gonna have to pay if they kept him, but they lost the opportunity by losing Hayward. They lost the opportunity to do the sign and trade with Miles Turner, which I think would have been massive for their franchise because they do have so many forwards with Jaylen Brown. They just paid Jason Tatum, and then I mean by not getting Miles Turner, they have to have Tice Star or Tristan Thompson, which I don't think they're either of them are starting caliber. And the problem is that the East is getting better. The East is getting much better as of recently. Obviously, the Nets are far and away going to be the top team to win the East this year. The Raptors are still a solid team. The Bucks with Giannis are still a solid team. I just don't see the Celtics getting better at all this offseason. Therefore, that's why I have them in the loser category.
Yeah, I actually did not think of them as a loser of this offseason, but now that you say it, I do completely agree with you. I think we start to need to say Danny Ainge's seat is getting a little bit lukewarm down there in Boston, or up there in Boston, I should say. I do think Brad Stevens' seat is getting a bit lukewarm as well. I think we saw him get plain out coached in this playoff run. I think you can argue that Nick Nurse outcoached him for most of those games despite them winning that series. And I think you can absolutely argue that Eric Spoelstra outcoached Brad Stevens. Looking at Danny Ainge, I think it's very interesting because you get a situation where you trade for Kyrie Irving and you rub a lot of NBA players, a lot of the community, a lot of your fans the wrong way in trading away Isaiah Thomas. You rub Gordon Hayward the wrong way, who was heavily recruited by Isaiah Thomas, and then a week later, Isaiah Thomas is gone. And moves like that have a ripple effect on your organization where players aren't going to want to re-sign with you and want to sign with you in general if you don't show any loyalty to your players. So flash forwarding today, they lost Kyrie Irving, they lost Al Horford, both for nothing, and then you end up losing, or they did trade Terry Rozier and get a bit of assets from that, but they end up losing Gordon Hayward for absolutely nothing too. I think it is time to look at the Boston Celtics and say, are they a legit contender that could add pieces through free agency? And I think that answer is no right now.
Yeah, and the struggle with Danny Ainge, he has to make some really impossible fiscal moves because they have so many stars they need to pay. They just gave Jason Tatum a max contract. They had to let Gordon Hayward walk because he was gonna get paid if he stayed there. Jaylen Brown just got paid last season, right? And they're gonna have to pay Kemba Walker. They're gonna have to pay Marcus Smart coming up because Marcus Smart obviously doesn't really deserve a max contract, but he deserves a lot of money because he's kind of the heart and soul of that Celtics team. So this team, obviously, they're still with their roster right now. They're still at the top of the East, but I mean, in the future, I think that it's going to start to crumble a little bit.
Yeah, the Celtics simply got worse. Love or hate Gordon Hayward. I know his time with the Celtics was very divisive. He can get you 18 points a night, 20 points a night in the playoffs and play good defense, and that's very valuable. That's more valuable, honestly, than what Kemba Walker brought them in the playoffs. I think me and you talked about it before the playoffs and how we did suspect Kemba Walker would struggle come playoff time, and that absolutely happened to have one of your highest paid players on the team at the moment. I know Jason Tatum just surpassed him with that max contract, but just not show up in the playoffs at all. A liability on offense and defense. Going into next season with a worse off team, I just don't picture a scenario where this team is in the finals next year.
Yeah, it's hurt because for those hardcore Boston sports fans. But let's get into your number one loser of the offseason.
Wow. So I do think my number one loser in this offseason is the Golden State Warriors. So you just come off a 5-year championship run. You win 3 championships. That's absolutely fantastic. So last year, you lose Kevin Durant, you lose some good role players. Last season, it's kind of a scratch. Klay Thompson was hurt with the ACL injury. Steph Curry missed most of the year with that hand injury. Draymond Green missed a lot of the year, and when he was on the court, he looked absolutely washed. They did a weird deal where they got D'Angelo Russell, and then they ended up, which they got from the Kevin Durant departure, and then they end up getting Andrew Wiggins, which I'll talk about his fit in a minute. But I mean, you get the second overall pick. You get James Wiseman, who we'll talk about in a little. He's a pretty good player, but I don't think he's ready to compete on a championship team. I think going into this season and having zero strategy for the offseason was just very foolish and naive of the Golden State Warriors because they're forgetting their roots and what made them great and successful in the first place. And that was just great depth on their team and great defense. That's why the 2015 and 16 Warriors were so great, along with Steph Curry, of course. But looking at this roster, they don't have good role players around Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. They just don't. They don't have the bench depth. They had arguably the worst team in the entire league last year, the second worst record in the league. They retain all these players and just add Steph Curry and Klay Thompson back and expect to be championship contenders. I think that's very, again, naive of them. And I don't think that they were championship contenders going into the season. And then you end up losing Klay Thompson for the entire year again, arguably more than a year with this Achilles injury. I just think that really hurt. This team is going to be scratching for probably a fifth or sixth seed in the West. If Steph Curry could elevate this team anywhere above that, that would be just nothing short of a miracle because I do think this roster is that bad. I think Draymond Green is an absolutely crippling contract. I think he's very past his prime, doesn't contribute much on the defensive end, and he contributes nothing on the offensive end. And then real quick with Andrew Wiggins, I don't know why you would prefer him over D'Angelo Russell. No, but neither of them play defense, and D'Angelo Russell is actually a scheme fit, and Andrew Wiggins can't shoot the three at a high rate, isn't a good catch and shoot guy, and needs the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a fourth spot on my losers, it would probably be the Warriors. But if that being said, if Klay Thompson was going to play this season, he would not be. They would not be in my loser team because I think they would be a top Western team if Klay was healthy. That just really hurt them. That derailed their season. We'll get into it later, but I'm in love with James Wiseman. I think he's going to be a really great player. But like you said, they kind of sold out with that last season with Kevin Durant. They kind of got rid of their whole bench just to keep that core together, and it hurt them down the stretch in the playoffs when Klay and Durant were got injured in the finals. But obviously, they did add Oubre, who I think Kelly Oubre is a great player off the bench. But that being said, they did not, like you said, they didn't add anyone else. They're putting a lot of weight on Klay and Steph, and now Klay is out, so now there's much more weight on Curry to really perform like an MVP, which he's coming off a season where he did not play, so there might be some rust. And Andrew Wiggins, Andrew Wiggins is a bust.
Yeah.
He just kind of went to he was in college, saw he could get into the NBA, get paid. He went to the NBA, got paid, and it kind of just became a lazy player. He has not gotten better at all. And I think this season it's kind of a loss for the Warriors. They probably will make the playoffs if Steph is able to perform like an MVP. But that being said, they're not going to make it far because this obviously the story of the NBA the past 10 years, the West is so strong that a 5 seed is not going to make it far into the playoffs.
I mean, yeah, and there's going to be just teams scratching tooth and nail for this 8th seed in the West, no less the 1, 2, 3, 4 seed. The Nuggets are a shoo-in, and we could talk about the teams down the line. But even if a team like the Rockets, they retain their roster, they're going to be a playoff team. Teams like the Suns, other teams, they're going to be scratching for playoff spots.
Speaking of the Suns, I'm going to go into my second winner of the offseason. I'm going to have the Phoenix Suns there. Obviously, they didn't make that many moves outside of the CP3 trade. They got Jay Crowder, who I think is a really great bench player. He's kind of the solid bench player of the Heat, and that's kind of the reason they made it so far. He's athletic. He's a great defensive player. And they locked up Dario Saric, who I think is a really underrated player in the NBA. But going into the trade, getting CP3 I think is absolutely massive for this franchise. They have such a young core with Booker, Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton, Cam Johnson, drafting Jalen Smith, who I'm not the biggest fan of Jalen Smith. I went to Ohio State. Maryland's in the Big Ten. I saw Jalen Smith play live, and he's 7 foot, but he's so soft. Our Caleb Weston, our center, who is about 5 inches shorter than him, was just dominating him down low. He's so soft, which I'm not a fan of that. But CP3 is not soft at all. I think he can kind of get into Jalen Smith's head a little bit, kind of toughen him up, and I think he can toughen up this whole franchise. I think it's going to do this team wonders.
Just going into, and that segues into my second winner, that is going to be the Suns as well. Just going into this offseason alone, with the high of going 8-0 in the bubble, whether that's like a false sense of positivity going into the season or not, in the NBA, perception is reality. If you really truly have that high of just thinking you're a really good team going into the season, then usually that confidence is going to translate. Going out and getting Chris Paul, this team is a playoff roster now. I think it's great for the Suns organization to see if they have a winning player in Devin Booker or not. We know Devin Booker could bring it offensively. He even improved as a playmaker. He can even pass the ball very well now. He's improved slightly on the defensive end, yet there's things to be desired there. The only thing that hasn't been there for him has been winning, the wins and losses. So now you pair him with a star point guard. I think Chris Paul is still a top 20 player in the NBA, top 15 player. I think you can even say, obviously, I don't even need to speak upon his resume. Then you pair Chris Paul with a really great young center in DeAndre Ayton, who their skill sets are going to match very well. Just having DeAndre Ayton for a full season, presumably, is going to be huge too, because I remember he was very hyped up going into last season, misses the first 20 games because of PEDs, I believe, and then just kind of derailed the entire Suns season from there, including DeAndre Ayton. So just going into the season fresh, having a fresh team, and having a very positive outlook on the season, not looking on the outside looking in, just kind of looking on the inside, thinking of themselves as a playoff team. I think it's a huge win for the Suns, who haven't made a lot of moves like this in recent memory.
Yeah, the Suns have a lot of like questionable coaching and front office moves, but having CP3 on the court, he can be the coach on the court during a game. I think he's going to make these young guys really realize like what it is to win. I mean, we saw him go to the Thunder as the Thunder were written off as going to be one of the worst teams in the league, and he led them into the playoffs, and they battled every game. I think that's how great CP3 really is. Obviously, he's a bit older, coming with age, he's going to get worse and worse, but like you said, he's still top 20, and even if he gets worse, he still has that the IQ, the mentality of winning. That's what's going to set him apart from kind of a declining skill set.
Yeah, at the very least, Chris Paul is going to give you 16 points a game, and he's going to give you 10 assists a game, and that's very valuable in the NBA. But going into my second loser of the offseason, I'm going to say the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, this team simply did not address the problems that were very blatant come second round, even first round of the playoffs where they struggled against the Mavericks. This team doesn't have a playmaker. This team does not have a point guard. It just does not have a point guard, a true point guard that could facilitate the ball. They don't have a player that could facilitate the ball. As good as Kawhi Leonard is, not that good of a passer. Paul George, not that good of a passer. Neither is Lou Will. They don't address the major problem. They do address a problem that is Doc Rivers, but I think they kind of scapegoated Doc Rivers and saying, oh, we're going to fire Doc Rivers and everything's going to be okay. You end up hiring an eternal head coach, a coach who is just your assistant head coach, where you already had chemistry problems, you already had problems within the organization, and you don't go outside the organization to hire your next head coach. I think that was extremely weird. You hire Tyronn Lue, who is not going to make your team better, not going to make your team worse, not a schematic guy. He's fine. He's a player coach. He's going to get along with the players. That's about it. Nothing else to say about Tyronn Lue, positive or negative. You end up losing your – sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I thought you were done, but you can keep going.
Yeah, you just – real quick, you end up losing your six men in Montrezl Harrell, who is a great punch off the bench. You overpay Marcus Morris really badly and – just didn't improve this roster and just simply got worse.
Yeah, this is just the case where teams around you get better and they didn't really make changes to improve themselves. So it's kind of like staying stagnant in where teams are getting better. And I think that just they're obviously going to be a great team in the West because obviously in the regular season Paul George plays great. We all know Kawhi is great, but in the playoffs we saw it this year. They just relied on just isolation ball, which did not work against teams like the Lakers, they didn't play Lakers, but it would not have worked if they played the Lakers, who was a very dominant defensive team. They struggled down the stretch when they needed to pass the ball around. I think I saw some rumors saying that they might trade Lou Will to something like the Mavericks, which I think maybe they should trade him to the Mavericks, get some kind of more like bench players that can fit the role of not being an isolation ball and kind of play around Paul George and Kawhi. I think that would be really beneficial for them. So with my second loser, kind of a similar case to what you were going at with the Clippers, is the Nuggets. They lost Jeremy Grant, which I think is a very massive loss, and they just did not get really – they didn't get better. They came off a Western Conference Finals appearance, which is huge for their franchise because they haven't made that deep of a run in a really long time. But they didn't – like the Clippers, they didn't get better. They lost a great player in Grant. I mean, all the teams are getting around them are getting better, and they're relying a lot on Michael Porter Jr. to kind of take that step forward to become that third guy on the team. And Jamal Murray, obviously he was just playing unconscious through the whole bubble, and we don't know if he's going to play that level coming this season. So there's a lot of ifs that the Nuggets are relying on to be able to perform well into this season.
Yeah, I think the Nuggets, that's a very interesting one because coming off of a great season, no one expected them to be in the Western Conference Finals. No one expected them to beat the Clippers, and they did both. They came back from 2-3-1 series, which is absolutely incredible. And usually when you see that kind of playoff run by a team that's not supposed to get there, usually they do worse the next season. We'll see with the Nuggets, but simply put, if they added a borderline superstar player in Jamal Murray, having him go from 18 points per game in the regular season to 26 points per game in the bubble. If you can carry that over somewhat, average 24 points a game on good efficiency in the season, I think this offseason is already a win for them, to be honest. I know they did lose Jeremy Grant, which I think is going to be huge for them, but again, they did add another player in Michael Porter Jr., who obviously, of course, they already had him, but really didn't play for them in the regular season. So they're adding potentially two brand new, changed, much improved players to their roster. They still have the Joker, and they just kind of retooled this roster with a bit of kind of low end signings to guarantee that at least they're going to be a top 3 seed in the West again, in my opinion. And come playoff time, if Michael Porter Jr. could make that jump, Jamal Murray could be as great as he could be. I do believe that they could be back in the Western Conference Finals.
No, right. I really like the Nuggets. I just think there's way too many ifs with Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. to kind of be confident in that they're going to make a deep run next year.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're going with that for sure. I mean, their team, I think they remind me of the Trailblazers from 2 years ago a little bit, where they completely caught fire. They did end up getting absolutely just manhandled in the Western Conference Finals against the 2018 Golden State Warriors, but weren't able to recapture that magic the next year. So I think the Nuggets are 1 or 2 injuries away from being a 7 seed, being a 6 seed in the Western Conference. But getting into what would be my last winner of the offseason, I'm going to say the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think I struggled with this one a little bit to pick a winner because I don't like a lot of teams' off seasons, to be honest, this year. I think that most teams kind of took the weird off season, weird COVID shortened off season, weird next season with the 72 games. We're going to run it back with our squad and look forward to the 2021 off season. I think a lot of teams had that kind of approach. So not a lot of teams were big winners of this offseason. But with the Thunder, you have a team where I know me and you wanted the Thunder to keep Chris Paul and kind of keep this roster together to just be a playoff team. Now, obviously, they're not going to be a playoff team. They're going to be one of the worst teams in the league, potentially a bottom 5 team in the league. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is by far your best player at this point in your team. You didn't really retain any key players from that playoff run besides Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And you did acquire a lot of picks, not only next year, but for the future. Of course, I think a big thing for the Thunder looking forward to next season is a lot of teams have winning expectations. And if you can get a top 3 pick in next year's draft, rumor has it that the top 7 picks next year would all be selected number 1 if they went this year. That could be a bit hyperbolic. I haven't done my research on it, but I've heard a lot of rumbling saying that next year's draft is very top heavy, a lot of superstar talent. So if they can acquire a top 3 pick in next year's draft, looking with foresight at this offseason, I think it's already a win if they could do that next offseason.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've talked about this for such a long time where I think Sam Presti is just a genius. accumulated so many picks. I think he has 22 in the next three
Yeah, it's
drafts,
crazy.
two drafts. I mean, it's insane. And like the point you made about this year's NBA draft, I remember I was just 2 days ago. I was watching a college basketball game. I think it was Gonzaga versus I forgot who they played, but they were saying that this is one of the best like high school senior draft recruiting classes of all time. There were just so
Yeah.
many great stars coming out, and they are obviously a lot of them are going to be one and done, so that's going to mean they're going to be in this year's draft. So Sam Presti just accumulating so many picks, obviously kind of exploding a roster where they made the playoffs, which is hard to do because as like a fan base, you would be upset if your team made the playoffs and just explode the whole team. But kind of CP3, like we said with the Suns, he's older, so we don't know how much talent he's going to have left. So Sam Presti could have said, we're not going to win a finals with this roster with CP3. He's looking forward to the future, and he's already making these jumps to see, like, pinpoint how can we get this guy? How can we get this guy? I mean, he's already making moves, which is extremely impressive, and I think he needs to be praised as one of the best GMs in the league.
Yeah, and I think the rationalization for a lot of teams to have a similar roster to what the Thunder did last year, you do have a young guy or two, but for the most part, you have Chris Paul, you have Danilo Gallinari, you have Steven Adams, you have guys that are not going to get better in a roster that's not going to get better as currently constructed. And you're a 7 seed, you're an 8 seed, you're a 6 seed, you're hovering around being a playoff team. Didn't win a playoff game. I think with a lot of teams kind of in that quote unquote purgatory, they do that in order to simply stay afloat, sell tickets, sell playoff game tickets. I think next year, if you're not a playoff team, that's probably the best year to not be a playoff team, as there's not really going to be a lot of fans in the stadium. There's not going to be a lot of tickets to be sold anyways. So if you want to take a hit on kind of sales in terms of your tickets, I think next year is the perfect year to do that.
Yeah, and getting into my last loser, I might get some slack for this one. I don't know if people might like this one, but I'm gonna have the Milwaukee Bucks as my loser of the offseason.
Wow.
Obviously, trading for Drew Holiday was massive. They got rid of Eric Bledsoe, who has just been atrocious, really. His ice cold shooting from three. They lost George Hill, which I think is really bad. I think George Hill's a great player off the bench for this Bucks team. But the thing is, they're putting so much weight on Dante DiVincenzo and Pat Connaughton. They're gonna have to play massive minutes. We gave problems for the Lakers giving so many minutes to Alex Caruso. Obviously, Alex Caruso a fan favorite, but he's not that great of an NBA player to be playing 20 plus minutes. That's what the Bucks are gonna have to do with DiVincenzo and Connaughton. They're gonna have to play so many minutes, and also with the whole debacle with losing Bogdanov or
Yeah.
Boban. I mean not Boban. You know what I'm talking about.
Bogdan
Bogdanovich.
Bogdanovic, yep.
Yeah, that was just a massive loss. And if they got him, that would have been huge for Giannis to kind of keep him in Milwaukee with having Drew Holiday and having Bogdan. That would have been a great backcourt for Giannis to play with.
I completely agree. I don't have them as a loser, but I do think they're a pretty big loser. I mean, I think that Bogdan situation alone could potentially make Giannis not sign the Supermax. Kind of the story behind that a little bit is that Bogdan, along with Thanos and Giannis Antetokounmpo, all great friends, all really respect each other, all work on their games together in the offseason. They're fellow foreign players. They really respect each other's game. And I know that Giannis Antetokounmpo, on the top of his list for role players he wanted alongside him, it was Bogdan, and he really wanted the Bucks front office to get them. And for them to tamper, I know a lot of NBA teams tamper, but for that to leak and for another team to complain and for that to get rejected in and of itself is bad. But I think an even worse aspect of this is that the trade rumor of who they were going to trade leaked, and they're going to trade Dante DiVincenzo. So how could you, if you're Dante DiVincenzo, see if you were basically traded and then it was rejected? How are you going to show up to work the next day and be like, oh yeah, I want to be here, I want to be a Buck? I was just, I went from rookie to now I'm playing major minutes in an NBA second round game. They're relying heavily on him to create not only on the ball but off the ball making shots. I think they need to trade him at this point because they basically just failed. And now, what trade value is Dante DiVincenzo going to have as a guy that needs to be traded?
Yeah, it's like he's gonna come back to work and be like, "Oh, hey, you're back. What's up, man?" But obviously, yeah, DiVincenzo, he did win a national championship with Villanova, and he was the tournament player of the player of the tournament, which is very impressive. But that's college basketball. I don't know if they're kind of putting a lot of weight on him to perform like that in the playoffs this year, but they just did not get better enough for me to put them in the winner category at all. And obviously, I keep bringing this up with the Celtics. The Nets are the team to beat in the East right now. There's
Yeah.
obviously with Kyrie and KD, and who knows if they get James Harden, which those rumors were flying around left and right when earlier in the offseason. But I don't know. Like the Bucks are kind of losing Giannis. I don't know if they're going to be able to lock him down.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in the NBA, if you don't get better in the offseason, you get worse. If you stay the same, you get worse. And with the Bucks, you can argue, I guess, they got slightly better. I think you can argue they got slightly worse. But at the end of the day, again, they didn't address the major problems that this team had. This team doesn't have a closer. And Drew Holiday, as great of a player as he is, he's never proven to be a consistent closer. Not only that, but he has a very, very lengthy injury history in his pretty short yet long NBA career. I feel like Drew Holiday hasn't been in the NBA for too long, but then you fast forward and he's 29, 30 years old. But that kind of segues into my last loser. And I think this is a very sneaky loser of the entire NBA free agency. I think this is a team in the past 10, 15 years stuck in NBA purgatory, stuck in being middle fringe playoff team to a quote unquote contending team, but they're always just pretenders. They win a championship, and now I think in the trajectory they're heading back into mediocrity and they're heading back into NBA purgatory. And I'm talking about the Toronto Raptors. I just think with the Toronto Raptors, they just lost Ibaka and Gasol. I mean, I think those two players, along with obviously Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet. I think those two players were part of the heart and soul of this entire team. I mean, that was their entire front court of their championship team, of their team last year that made it deep into the playoffs. To lose those two players who stretched the court for you guys, added veteran leadership, added good defense, I think that can't be understated. I think those are two huge losses. You end up signing Fred VanVleet to a huge contract, which I think they needed to do that. I think Fred VanVleet is a very great player. Is he a guy that could be worth $30 million a year? I really don't think so. I think he's a guy that needs to be surrounded by a lot of talent to kind of carry a team to a lot of wins. I think Kyle Lowry is a guy who's going to regress with age. I think we already saw his scoring starting to fall off a little bit in the season last season, and they simply just did not improve this roster. Pascal Siakam was kind of exposed in the playoffs as a very just average playoff player if you ask him to do too much. And again, just a lack of progression from this roster, them aging, them not really having young players that show too much promise to get better. I just think this Raptors team is going to slowly slip in the playoff seeding in the East.
Yeah, they just lost a lot of key players. When they won that championship, Gasol was a massive key part of that, and I think losing him is rough. And like you said, they kind of needed to sign Van Vliet to this huge contract because they couldn't afford to lose that much of their core. But it kind of sets them up to really, really go after Giannis incredibly hard when he's a free agent. I know, like this offseason after the Lakers won the finals, the Heat, Raptors were kind of the top of the list to be able to sign Giannis. So I think they do have a great front office there they're in Toronto, and I think they are going to aggressively go after Giannis. But yeah, right now, like they're kind of teetering around that fourth seed, fifth seed of the Eastern Conference, which is hard because historically, or like the past 10 years, the East has been not that great. But right now, it's getting a lot better, I think. And if you're kind of down there in the lower seeds, it's going to be hard to be able to make a deep run in the playoffs when you have someone like the Nets, you have the Heat, you have the Celtics. It's going to be hard to kind of make a deep run as the lower seed.
Yeah, I just think this is a team that's going to be very unwilling to let go of a guy like Kyle Lowry, who means so much to them. I think you can argue Kyle Lowry's the best player in Raptors history in terms of just pure accolades on that basketball team. I have a weird feeling that they're going to either trade for or sign in free agency in the next couple of years DeMar DeRozan,
Yeah.
have a nice little like goodbye tour for him. And I think they're going to shift into slowly getting older and just getting worse. Have that kind of nice goodbye for Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, and then kind of hit a big reset button on that rebuild. But again, I can't underestimate Nick Nurse. He's a great head coach.
No, it's sad because I'm a fan of the Raptors. I really want them to be great.
Yeah.
They're just like they have a great fan base. They have a great coaching staff. They have a great GM, and I love Kyle Lowry. So it's sad to see them kind of slowly digressing. But moving on to my last winner of the offseason, I'm gonna go with someone that's a bit of a hot take for a winner. I'm gonna have the Atlanta Hawks. So
Mm.
obviously we just talked about Bogdan as someone who just was supposedly traded to the Nets or the Bucks, but that fell through. They signed Gallinari. They signed Rondo. They drafted Onyeka Okongwu. I think I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah.
But I really like him as a prospect. I think they do have some young core there with the Neil Hunter. They have Trae Young. They have I'm blanking out or John Collins. I really like him as well.
Yeah,
But
they have Clint Capella too.
yeah, Clint Capella. I think adding these like kind of these veteran players to these young guys is going to be really great for them to kind of slowly start hitting their stride as a young team that can make maybe an 8 seed, a 7 seed in this Eastern Conference. And I think Trae Young. The problem is two things with his team is Trae Young needs to start. I know he's the guy on the team, but he needs to start kind of being a playmaker, not just chucking up 50 shots a game. And the other problem is they have so many forwards now. They have Okongwu, they have Clint Capella, they have John Collins, they have Gallinari. So they need to kind of like start to see like where we're going to start these guys, where we're going to play this guy. Because Clint Capella, obviously they're paying him a lot of money, but if Okongwu was playing better than him, they're going to have to put Okongwu there at the center position, and that's going to make Clint Capella unhappy. So it's kind of really up to the coaching staff to start making sure everybody's happy with this Hawks team.
Man, the Hawks are a team I left off for a reason because I fought hard and long about them and whether they had a very good offseason, had a very bad offseason, or anywhere in between that. And where I lie with the Hawks is that I think offensively, I mean, they massively improved. I think having Trae Young, Kevin Herter out there, arguably in the starting five, having Danilo Gallinari, who's going to be a great pick and roll partner for him, great pick and pop player. He's just a player who adds wins to the column. He's just a really good role player in that. Very disappointing to see Danilo Gallinari not go to a championship contending team and be that third guy, be that fourth guy, be the guy that tips the scale for a team. Again, disappointing to see him not do that. You have John Collins, you have Clint Capella, both really good pick and roll partners. Then you have Bogdanovich, who is a very good knockdown shooter. This offense is going to put up 1,000 points a game, but this defense is going to give up 1,001 points a game. I mean, seriously, I think this could be the worst defense in the entire NBA next season. You have Trae Young, who I would argue is the worst defender in all of the NBA for a guy that gets 30 or more minutes, a guy that gets major starting minutes on an NBA team. Trae Young is that bad at defense. Kevin Herter's not good at defense. Danilo Gallinari's not good at defense. John Collins is awful at defense. He cannot play the five at defense at all, and he's 6'10". In the NBA today, you ideally want him to play that five position because he's not that good of a shooter on the outside either. So you kind of want to maybe move Danilo Gallinari to the four because if you have Danilo Gallinari at the three, he can't defend any wings on the three. So if you slide him to the three, slide John Collins to the five, he cannot play defense against any big man in the league. Clint Capella is a pretty good rim protector, but besides that, he's not going to contribute anything. Bogdanovich, keep trying to pronounce his name, he's not contributing anything on the defensive end. I just get extremely nervous about this team's just defensive potential. I do think they're going to be the worst defensive team in the league if this is the lineup they roll out with.
Yeah, obviously it's going to take a lot for the coaching staff to kind of put together a nice game plan on defense. But obviously their coaches aren't on the court, so it's up to these players to play well on defense. But I think with the leadership that they added with Rondo, I think Rondo is a great leader.
Yeah.
I think Gallinari is a great leader as well. And side point, I think I said Daniil Hunter. I meant DeAndre Hunter and not the football player.
Yeah.
But getting back to my point, I think with this veteran leadership on their team, I think it's going to really kind of hype up the younger guys. Obviously, we saw someone like the Mavericks who aren't great at defense, and they
Yeah.
made the playoffs, and they were able to win a lot of games because they would just pour so many points on the other team. So
Yeah.
hopefully the Hawks are able to pour 1,000 points in one game and just play just good enough on defense to be able to make a playoff run.
Yeah, that could certainly be the case. I believe the guy they just drafted has a lot of defensive potential. You have DeAndre Hunter, who I think that's already going to be a very weird top 5 pick in NBA history. He's going to kind of phase out into existence just because he's not even going to get touches on this basketball team. He's going to be asked to have a very defensive oriented role, sadly. And again, I just don't have confidence in any of these guys in the starting 5 to drastically improve their defensive game to warrant them even being a top 25 defense in the league, quite honestly.
We'll see. I mean, Atlanta run and gun team. Hopefully in the future, it'll be fun to watch. At least that will give them that.
Certainly.
But moving on to, we're going to talk about a little bit of the NBA drafts. Just happened maybe a week ago. We'll talk about, I think, the top 3 picks and then maybe some other players that we can dive into. But obviously,
Yeah.
the first of all pick was Anthony Edwards to the Timberwolves. Edwards he's very athletic. I think he's a gifted scorer. It could work for the Timberwolves because they don't really have that number 1 scorer. Maybe D'Angelo Russell could be kind of a good pairing at the shooting guard. But the problem I have with Anthony Edwards is, does he care about playing basketball, or is he going to be another Andrew Wiggins?
Yeah, I mean, for the Timberwolves to draft 2 guys, number 1, who their love for the basketball game is just very questionable. I mean, I think that's a huge risk for the Timberwolves. I think it's kind of weird how this draft was so hyped up to have so many trades at the top, and there was no trades at the top that ended up happening, which I thought was very peculiar. I think the overall consensus of this draft was just very low. I think a lot of people were just very low on a lot of these prospects. Looking at Anthony Edwards, I absolutely loved his tape in college. I thought he looked really good in college. Obviously looked very good in high school as well. Again, like you said, hyper athletic. I think he's getting compared to guys like Donovan Mitchell. He's getting compared to guys like Dwayne Wade, who I believe Dwayne Wade's coach at Marquette was his current coach in college, which again, I love that kind of connection that they have together. And with Anthony Edwards, I get the sense when I watch his college tape that he was having so much fun out there. But if it got extremely difficult for him, if he really needed to try his absolute hardest and then some to even be a good player, I think he would struggle with that. I think he is a guy that wants to coast off his talent a little bit. Very concerning to hear his comments about the NFL and how, oh, he'd join the NFL in a heartbeat if it wasn't for him playing basketball right now, or he would even choose the NFL over the NBA. And just being able to, I think his college coach said he can only consume basketball at very short amounts of time in short bursts. I think that's very concerning. I think if you're the number 1 pick in the draft, or even the 60th pick in the draft, you should be able to watch basketball all day, every day for days on end. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be Kevin Durant, eat, sleep, live, breathe basketball and have absolutely no life outside of basketball. I'm not saying you have to be like that, but you have to be basketball first. You just have to, especially at this young stages of his developmental career. And for Anthony Edwards to not be that guy, that's certainly concerning.
Yeah, side note, I believe his college coach is married to Jim and John Harbaugh's sister, which is a pretty fun fact. But yeah, with Anthony Edwards, it kind of just adds to the whole problem of this year's NBA draft is just the lack of maturity with a lot of these players. I think in high school, they're going to have some fun mixtapes you can watch. College will be fun to watch, but Anthony Edwards played for Georgia, and they were god-awful. They weren't good
Yeah.
at all, and he's supposed to be this great player, and like he didn't lead them to like a great ranking in the SEC, which is not even a great basketball conference to begin with. I think Anthony Edwards, he needs to address his shooting a lot. I mean, I think he was shooting like 29% from the 3, which is not great at all. But I think kind of if you're looking at deep dive in basketball analytics, he had a great free throw line or free throw percentage. So when he's taking open shots, he makes them, which is a good sign. But when he's covered from 3, he misses them, which I think a lot of basketball minds kind of look at when they're thinking about 3-point shooting. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is Anthony Edwards' maturity, and it's just not there. I think he just said he's the type of player that thinks basketball is just a job and not like he doesn't have the love of the game for it.
Yeah, for the top 3 picks to be a little bit underwhelming. The 4th pick in the draft, blanking on his name, I believe it was something Williams for
Patrick
the
Williams.
Patrick Williams. Yep, I knew that was his name, just was not confident in saying it. Him being a six man coming off the bench, I know there's been some great players going into the NBA who are six men, such as Devin Booker, who we were just talking about, but there's other guys like Deion Waiters who really haven't panned out in the NBA, and just very underwhelming talent throughout this draft class. I heard Colin Cowherd saying, how could it be that you have a national sport, a very expensive sport, a very just not accessible sport, a sport that you can't play alone, can't practice alone in football, and have so much talent in the draft year in and year out, and then have an international sport that everybody plays across the entire world. It's arguably the second most popular sport in the world. The global reach that the NBA has, and you can't muster up one prospect that is a consensus number one overall pick. I do think that the NBA image took a slight hit from this NBA draft, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree, and hopefully next year that draft class can kind of propel it back to what it's used to be with the NBA draft. Moving on to the second pick, we have James Wiseman to the Warriors, which I think it's a good fit for the Warriors. They don't have that solid big man starting for the team. Obviously, it's been kind of the hole in their roster for quite some time. They had Andrew Bogut at one point. They had Zaza Pachulia at another point. So I think if James Wiseman's able to grow into a great, not even a star, just a great kind of all-star potential player, I think that's going to be really great for the Warriors. Obviously, the question marks around him are he played, what, 2 games, I want to say, at Memphis because he got in
Yeah.
trouble with some sort of money agreement with Penny Hardaway at coaching. But I do think he could be good. He could be that new age center because he's very athletic. I'm not entirely sure about how great he is at shooting, but if he is able to develop a jump shot, he'll be scary at the center position for the Warriors.
I think he showed some potential as a shooter. I know his shot is very slow and very slow to develop. We've seen some guys like Al Horford have some success with a very slow 3-point shot, but is James Wiseman ever going to be shooting 4 threes a game, making 1.5? I really don't think so. I think he's a guy, he's going to attempt max in his career 2 threes a game, which not too much to affect the overall game from a scoring standpoint. And I just question this pick simply because, yes, this guy hasn't played basketball in over a year, but not because of James Wiseman, but simply because of just drafting a center number 2 overall in the modern NBA. I think it's just very backwards thinking. I think it could be even compared to drafting a running back number 2 overall. No matter how much of a talent they are, I think at some point, unless you're picking a guy like Karl Anthony Towns who could do it all, who can handle the ball as well, who could just, you can revolve an entire offense around, he's going to be a 25 point per game scorer guarantee. I think it's just very shaky to draft a rim running big man number 2 overall in the NBA draft.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I just think this has been a hole with the Warriors organization for
Yeah.
their whole every championship run they've had. So I think kind of they're looking at the potential of if we can solidify this position, we don't have to worry about it for 10 years, for 5 years around that. It's gonna be they can address their bench like that's been so bad the past couple of years.
Yeah, I just think this pick is a loss mainly because you have Steph Curry on your roster. I believe you did have Klay Thompson going into draft night, or I think that was the day he got injured. I don't think they knew the severity of the injury yet. But again, you have Steph Curry on your roster. You're kind of in win now mode. And you have Andrew Wiggins. You could have traded Andrew Wiggins in the second overall pick for a very impactful player, a player who I think impact would succeed James Wiseman and Andrew Wiggins combined. Get a guy who's more of a scheme fit at this point. I think that would have been a better move for the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, I agree because usually it's weird. NBA basketball, there's always so many trades, and I was surprised how like least amount of trades were in this NBA draft. But getting into the next pick, kind of the last pick we're going to talk about, the man himself, kind of hyped since he was in ninth grade of high school, LaMelo Ball to the Hornets. So instantly, I think the first reaction is LeVar Ball and Jordan are going to be under the same roof at one point in this relationship with the Hornets. But obviously, LaMelo Ball, he's very athletic. What is he, 6'7", which is
Yeah.
just extremely rare at the point guard position. I mean, he's a great playmaker. I mean, I think that just runs in the ball family. Lonzo is one of the great playmakers in today's NBA at the point guard position. He is a great scorer. He was a great scorer in high school. He was a great scorer in the Australian League. He was in the past year. But the problem I see with LaMelo is, like Lonzo, is his jump shot going to be able to kind of become a working NBA jump shot? Lonzo had to drastically tweak his jump shot to become kind of a solid NBA player, which I think he is now, respectively. But Lonzo or LaMelo, when he shoots his three, his like whole body just flails. It's not like
Yeah.
a very like relaxed shot. He kind of his legs go out one way, his arms go out another way. It's just very, I think, very sloppy. I think LeVar just kind of tossed him the ball when he was young and just said, "Hey, just shoot it." That's kind of his coaching. He didn't really kind of tweak his mechanics at all. And also a problem that we saw with Anthony Edwards is LaMelo Ball's maturity. I think he's a very, very immature player. Obviously, he's been in some uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
LeVar kind of coddled him and kind of just, I don't know how to like put him into the limelight very young age. So that kind of might have stunted his maturity. But LaMelo Ball just, you sent me an interview earlier this week where he was just saying one word answers to every question that was asked of him, which is not something you want your franchise player to do. We saw LeBron James growing up, and he was kind of being a very stoic interviewer or whatever the interviewee, if you will, when he was in 10th grade of high school. I don't think LaMelo Ball is that.
Yeah, with LaMelo Ball, he acts and just kind of talks like if either you or I just walked into a random high school and just like started interviewing sophomores and juniors with their kind of just language, how they speak, and just how they come about things. Just that I don't give a shit type of attitude. I don't know if that works in the NBA level. I think a lot of NBA guys kind of take offense to that I don't give a shit type of attitude and want to attack you even more because I think Lonzo Ball, a huge problem with him has just been the lack of intensity he's shown on the basketball court. He's never too high, he's never too low, but at some point you need some of that intimidation factor, and I think that's what Lonzo Ball has lacked, and I think that's something that LaMelo Ball has lacked and will lack in the NBA. I'm very torn on LaMelo Ball because my heart wants to tell me and wants me to say that he's going to be a really good NBA player, but my head says bust, bust, bust. LaMelo Ball, he shot 37% from the field. He shot 25% from three. I know he's slightly better of a shooter than that. It was a lot of his shot selection, but who's to say his shot selection is ever going to get better? He's always had a notoriously very gunner, just a really bad shot selection. He's never been in an actual just system. He's never been an actual really good organization, a good coach, a good just offense to have his skills properly utilized. It's just kind of I'm going to sit around half court and I'm going to shoot the ball and I'm going to make a really good outlet pass. That's been LaMelo Ball's game in high school and even over with the Hawks in the Australian NBL basketball league. So LaMelo Ball, again, he hasn't shown much care on the defensive end either. He just solely relies on very contested three-point shots and floaters around the rim. And when I watch him play in the NBL, I think his floaters are very not translatable to the NBA. He kind of sized up smaller defenders, but come in the NBA, he's only 180 pounds. He's going to get absolutely body in his first one or two seasons. That's something that Lonzo Ball has struggled with as well. His shots around the rim, he's been absolutely atrocious around the rim, and that's even caused him to stop going around the rim in his entirety. I think a great draft day comparison for LaMelo is Lonzo, not only because they are brothers, but just because I think they have very similar games going into the NBA. And again, I'm just very, very nervous about LaMelo going to a team who I think has arguably the worst owner in all of sports, to a team that has not proven to have a good developmental system, drafts bust after bust, and just a team that has no real plan. They signed Gordon Hayward, which is nice. You get your roster a little bit better. That's going to handicap him in year 3 or 4 because he's making 30 mil a year. You have Terry Rozier, you have Dante Graham. I mean, it's just a very weird, crowded rotation. I'm just not sure how this team is going to work out.
Yeah, and with the rotation, I still think LaMelo's going to kind of act like he's got the green light, and I think he's going to continue to shoot wildly when he's in the game. And the problem with LaMelo is I think Lonzo is a lot more mature than he is. And
Yeah.
we saw when Lonzo's first NBA game, Patrick Beverly, I want to say it was Patrick Beverly, was kind
Yep.
of like getting in his head like instantly, and I don't think LaMelo would be able to handle that if some player was trying to chirp at him and kind of pushing him around. I think Lonzo is a lot more mature than LaMelo is, so he was kind of able to handle that a little better than potentially LaMelo will. And LaMelo just like you said, he's so skinny. He definitely needs to hit the weight room. He needs to get like a dietitian to get some weight up because he's going to try to attack the rim and he's just going to get absolutely destroyed by someone like Anthony Davis or the Joker. They're gonna be like so much heavier than him, and it's a boy among men right now.
I think LaMelo Ball absolutely loves basketball. I don't think that's much of a question for me, but I think his ethic is extremely questionable. I've seen what's it called, the Life in the Family, whatever, the Lonzo Ball
Ball in the
or the
family.
yeah, Ball in the Family, the Ball family little show they got going there. All the episodes I've seen of it is basically LeVar just absolutely having to force LaMelo Ball to do anything, to pick up a basketball, to shoot around, to hit the weight room, especially lifting weights. It just seemed his entire life it's been a huge chore for him to work out rather than he actually wants to work out. He wants to get stronger. He only wants to put up shots. He doesn't want to hit the weight room. Come NBA, that's straight up just not going to work. Again, Lonzo Ball has struggled with that. Even Lonzo at this point has put on weight, but I think he still has struggled with his strength kind of compared to other NBA players. And again, like you said, I think Lonzo Ball can handle some of that pressure and that target on my back better than LaMelo. I think we saw him snap in that one game. I believe it was in the JBL, not the NBL, where he slapped that guy in the face. It was very funny. But going off of that, I mean, just I remember with that Pat Bev game that you just alluded to. After the end of the game, Patrick Beverly went up to LeVar Ball and it was in front of everyone and screamed, "That was for you. That wasn't because of Lonzo. That was for you. Like you put that target on your son's back. I just destroyed your son on national television solely because of you. Didn't even have anything to do with Lonzo." Because again, Lonzo is a very quiet kid. So there's undoubtedly going to be a target on LaMelo's back. And I'm just really not sure if he's going to succeed or not.
Yeah, I mean he's an exciting player, but it's gonna be a very hard uphill battle for LaMelo.
Yeah, especially with, again, one more point here with LaMelo Ball. Having Michael Jordan breathing down your neck, that is just a huge task. I think it was might have been Malik Monk, it might have been Mikal Bridges. It was one of the two players. Believe it was last year. He made a bad shot near the buzzer, and Michael Jordan walks up to him and backhands him. Literally backhands him. First off, if that was any other owner, they would be in jail with handcuffs on their hand. But I mean, you have a pressure like that. You have the greatest player of all time who is arguably who is a very egotistical person who hates his image being shit on, and his image has been shit on year after year in the NBA draft. Adam Morrison, Kwame Brown, Cody Zeller, Frank Kaminsky. I mean, the list goes on and on with bad Michael Jordan draft picks. LaMelo Ball cannot be added to the list because if it is, that's going to take an even bigger hit on Michael Jordan's legacy.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be hard just because obviously the history of LeVar calling Jordan out multiple times. So it was pretty comical seeing LaMelo being drafted by the Hornets because that was kind of the first thought that popped into my mind.
Very ironic how things come full circle.
And then personal story against LaMelo when me and you drove 45 minutes thinking we were gonna watch LaMelo ball, but it was the Spire like C team. We didn't even get to see him or Robert, the really tall guy.
Robbie, the 7'7" freak of a man. I think me and you, real quick, really had a false sense of hope there. I think we both secretly knew that LaMelo Ball wasn't about to walk onto the court, but we just kind of went just for that like 1% chance it was going to happen.
No, I wasn't even like other people were wearing the Melo jerseys or shirts. So I was like, all right, maybe he'll show up, but he never showed up. It was fun though. It was good high school basketball. I wasn't mad about that. But Lamelo Ball embarrassed us. But thank you everybody for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.